All right, thank you. So our next topic is striking a balance utilizing hardware intrinsics for accelerating post-quantum cryptography. Our next speaker is David Hook. He's a VP software engineer, Legion of the Bouncy Castle, Keyfactor / Legion of the Bouncy Castle. And he came all the way from Australia. Let's welcome David.
Okay, so other than trying to get the longest job title on the planet, we've recently been trying to work out what, trying to work out just some ways of accelerating the post-quantum algorithms via Java and the use of JNI. So for those of you that were here for my talk last year, we did a project with Intel involving the use of AES&I and the SHA-2 instructions that they made available on their CPUs, which actually went quite well. So the real question we were trying to ask was, was it possible to get similar performance gains now with what we knew about the PQC instructions, algorithms? Interesting thing to embark on when the standards are still in the process of being published. It was raised with me earlier this week that perhaps we were being a bit overly ambitious. But speaking as someone who is the representative of an organisation that embarked on a FIPS certification but nothing but a PDF of the IG and no funding 8 years ago, I had to assure the person that that was correct. So we didn't get as far as we wanted to with this, but we did actually find some interesting things out. Okay, so the first question really is, why not just wrap? libOQS actually does have a wrapper for JNI, which you can use. And in fact, in the next couple of slides, I'll have some benchmarks that actually show some comparisons we did. The problem, of course, is, it means including the full OQS library. So at the moment, that weighs in at around about 140,000 lines of C and over 100,000 lines of assembler. Now, if you're trying to actually certify something, which is always ultimately our target when we do these things at the moment, that's really going to increase the workload. The JVM, of course, provides a lot of protection mechanisms, which suddenly, if you've incorporated an entire C library underneath, you lose. And we did find with the experience of last year that if you could just surgically add bits and pieces for the critical path code, it was actually possible to get quite a bit of acceleration, still end up with some safe code. So for example, the total C code that we actually had in the project last year was around 9,000 lines. Much easier to review and a lot smaller. And it was very, very simple code as well. So that said, yeah, a simple wrap does provide a good baseline, but just before I move on to that, I'll just also bring up something else that came up with the JNI project, which is the other issue that you get if you're trying to incorporate a full library under your Java code is that you can't be entirely sure what the external dependencies are. And as an example of that, when we first implemented the AES code last year, we used C++. And that worked fine on our machine. It worked fine on the client's machine, but we were both running Ubuntu, and when it came time to actually deploy it to production, it turned out that the production machines were all running CentOS. It's funny how things just don't get mentioned in meetings until the last possible minute. I don't know if it's a product of big companies or whatever, but yeah, it's always the things you don't know that get you killed. I think I'll just say that. Anyway, we were able to resolve that, but basically we ended up having to translate everything into C and then going back to the oldest C compiler we could find, and that sorted out the libc dependencies. And we actually ended up with something which would quite comfortably run on Ubuntu and also run on CentOS as well. Obviously, if you're trying to incorporate something like libOQS, it's very, very difficult to make those decisions or those adaptations if you're actually trying to support a wide variety of platforms like we are. So getting to the baseline, this is what wrapped libOQS looks like for MLDSA 65, and also what our current Java implementation looks like, or at least current as of about 4 weeks ago. So I haven't gone through all the parameter sets. I've just tried to present different parameter sets for different algorithms that are sort of representative. The issue I ran into really was the plotting software ran out of colours very quickly, and then it just became incredibly confusing. I mean, you know, I know it's the web and everything, but you don't necessarily want something like that in a slide. But yeah, first thing is, you know, you kind of go, oh, that doesn't look too bad, until you realise, of course, that the yellow line is in fact signing on libOQS and the red line is verification for Java. So yeah, you can see there that, you know, it's between 1 and 3 times fast, well, 1.5 to 3 times faster to actually use wrapped libOQS. You know, as a developer, that kind of performance gap is not something that you regard as insurmountable, but it's obviously something you want to attend to. The other funny thing too about this graph is the drop-off in MLDSA. So when we first saw that, we thought it might have been something to do with the J&I bridge kicking in at some level. We weren't entirely sure. But then when we went to doing SLH DSA, which was, it took a while to run these benchmarks. Yeah, you can see there the performance is actually quite consistent. So we've come to the conclusion that there's probably something in the OQS implementation of MLDSA which is not quite right. So I don't think the fall off should have been happening, because it wasn't really happening in our Java one as much. That said, again, you know, just reflecting to the comment I got earlier, I mean, it is early days for these algorithms, and it's clear that, you know, a lot of us have still got quite a bit to learn just in general about implementing them efficiently, I think. So again, you can see this looks more tragic. We have the red line and the green line, which is OQS, and then struggling along the bottom is below 200 is verification, and then getting crushed into the axis, which is never a good sign for a comparison, is of course the actual signing process in Java. So you can see, especially with this algorithm, there's quite a lot of room for improvement. Okay, so then we get to the chem. All I can say, this is a pretty good example of native code opening a big can of whoop ass on a Java application. Yeah, it's 9 times faster. So this is an important one to us, of course, because MLChem will be featured quite heavily in TLS. And if any of you have customers that implement or use TLS, you will realise they get really excited about handshake times, with good reason. So it's quite clear that us in the Java fraternity have a bit of catching up to do. This one's a bar graph, of course, because the message size is always the same. All right, so the first thing we tried SLH DSA, and the main reason we did that was because we were most familiar with the Intel architecture. I'll get to it a bit later, but to do MLChem and MLDSA, we actually needed to use ARM chips. And even then, there's actually better instructions for those two now, but I'll get to that as well. So the 3 main architectures we used were VASF, VAS, and AVX. These are basically, this is just the way that we categorise the actual Intel hardware, and it reflects the size of the actual pipelining that's possible with AES. VAS offers 4 blocks at a time, VAES offers 2, and then AVX is just your traditional ASNI. It's just processing one at a time. We also did some minor memory optimizations to try and make things a bit more efficient over the J&I bridge. And yeah, basically we just replaced the existing implementations with the intrinsics we used from last year. So essentially no additional code to what we'd already written and tested. And yeah, it was disappointing. That's about the only way I can describe it. I'll show you the graph in a minute. Then what we did, actually, we thought, oh, well, the way Sphinx Plus works, if you're familiar with it, or rather SLH DSA, to get hip with the current jargon, is, of course, there's bundles of hashing operations involved in various things that happen on. So what we then figured was, well, what we should really do to make this more effective is just bundle those into actually native functions and then call them. Again, that resulted in very, very simple code. So, you know, from a certification standpoint, we figured this would be very easy to review. And yeah, that added about another 800 lines of code. So there's a small price to pay for the performance that we actually did get. So this is how it looked just by substituting in the intrinsics. I mean, you can see there's a minor increase in speed in verification. Well, I'd say it was minor. And yeah, signing is almost the same. So not really anything to jump up and down about. I think it's the best way I can put it. Again, though, you can see the performance is quite flat. Other than that sudden drop off there. So yeah, we don't think the JNI bridge is really having that much of an effect in this case. So by then adding the intrinsics plus the native functions, we actually got a much better performance. So as you can see, we've gone from 400 to 800. So it's doubled. If I go back, oh, sorry, too far. Too far again. Right, thank you. Yeah, you can see that's 2,000. So, you know, 800 to 2,000 is still a bit of a distance. But again, from a developer point of view, you know, it's homing in, and 2 times is generally doable for things like this, especially when you're just starting out. Okay, so both these algorithms make heavy use of shake. So we actually thought what we'd do is we'd try and attack that first. There are SHA-3 helper instructions on the ARM processors. In fact, in the more recent ones, there are actually SHA-3 instructions. The ones we've used here, which I've written down because I just get confused by all the acronyms, were VRAX, which was just a rotate left, VXARQ, which was a rotate right with a 6-bit, and VBCAXQ, which was another rotate XOR. The last two were interesting because they actually allow you to do a limited amount of pipeline because they operate on 128-bit strings, but with 264-bit lanes. Now, the reason we did that was because we were able to create a small C implementation of the Keyfactor absorb function to support the required functionality for MLDSA and MLChem. That was about 119 lines of code as well. So again, not too bad. Now, the total C code was 545 lines. And then, yeah, we did some additional sort of JNI boundary work to try and minimise, to encapsulate things like we had with SLH DSA in order to minimise crossing and also just allow for sort of get some of the memory allocation out of the JVM into proper stack-based memory. So yeah, these were done on an Apple M1 Max using Megan's Apple. Again, if we were using more modern ARM chips, or we had access to them at the time, we probably could have actually gotten much better figures. But yeah, you'll see in this case, it has not really helped much. It's helped a little bit. I'll get to the reasons why we think that's the case. And again, with MLChem, if you actually look at that, you just kind of go, it's almost pointless. In fact, it's almost confusing. On one side, the native Java version is faster. On the other side, the native version is faster. But you don't get consistent performance between encapsulate or decapsulate. which again probably just reflects the fact that we need to understand the algorithms as we implement them better. And yeah, I'm not going to flick back to the wrapped version because you can probably all remember it was around 90K. So, you know, this is not even close. So, yeah, as I said, maybe a bit early for some of this stuff. I was trying to find a good one-slide summary to like get across the overall feeling we had before going on to thoughts and stuff. So this was really our overall conclusion. SLH-DSA we can definitely do something with now, but with the two modular lattice algorithms, we're actually still pretty stuffed as far as taking simple solutions go. I guess the basic takeaways, we did find that the JNI bridge actually gets quite expensive in some cases, and also use of internal buffers really makes a difference in how you do them. One thing we found was that in some cases in our code we had loops where people had allocated byte arrays, and the underlying native code, once it was introduced, was sufficiently fast that the fact that creating that byte array inside the loop and allowing for the time that it took for the byte array to be zeroed out, in addition to the fact that it seemed to confuse the JIT about how to optimize the memory management across the bridge, it actually made a significant difference in the actual performance we got. The other thing is, yeah, we definitely need better CPU support for SHA-3, Shake, and SHA-512. Intel are working on SHA-512 already. MLChem and MLDSA also draw quite heavily on their respective maths libraries, so really the next thing that we're kind of thinking about doing, which I'll talk a little bit later, is there's probably some room to actually optimize things a lot better for those just by implementing those themselves. The maths libraries aren't big in C. I mean, they do increase the, I guess, certification burden, but it's fairly safe code in the sense that everything's well encapsulated. So other things that kind of occurred to us, if you look at the preambles for FIPS Pub 203 and Section 8 of the preambles for 204 and 205, you'll actually state that mathematical equivalence can be used to justify changes in implementation. Now, this is interesting because there are cases in all those algorithms where pseudo-randomness is basically being generated using hash functions as part of the calculation. So there is actually proposals already out there for replacing that with the output from an RNG directly, providing it's giving you decent entropy. In fact, there's actually a paper that was published a while ago which suggests that in some cases that might be safer to do. The other thing, of course, is that that in itself, plus a few other things, really leave open the possibility that maybe we can do more than just provide hardware implementations for SHA-3 and the associated XOFs. And then we did find with the ARM chip, if the lane-based instructions had actually allowed us to do individual shifts on each lane rather than having to do the same shift on both, we could have actually pipelined the algorithm a lot more effectively in a similar way to what we do with AES on Intel. So yeah, our next stage is basically we're going to look at trying to implement optimally just the maths library section of MLChem and MLDSA and then call that. The other thing, of course, we want to do is we want to try and get our hands on a more modern ARM processor and see if we can actually make use of the SHA-3 instructions. I haven't actually looked at those personally, but I would imagine that they've been provided in a similar way to the hashing instructions, which means that it should be fairly easy to plug Shake into them as well. Shake in general, I think, needs good CPU support because it's really turning into a Swiss Army knife. It's come up everywhere. It will probably appear in the famous SP800 227, without a doubt. So it's used in KDFs, it's used in signatures, it's used for generating random pseudo-randomness. I mean, yeah, I think this is clearly an algorithm with a great future ahead of it. In the case of lattice, it's still early days, and I know people do say, you know, these algorithms may be broken or may not be. I'd be fairly confident that at least for the next few years they won't be. But yeah, there could be some things, actual instructions similar to modular exponentiation and that, as we've had with RSA in the past, which could actually make implementing the maths libraries and those a lot more effective as well. And again, that would contribute to efficiency both in native and JNI-based implementations. So, finally, we plan to include the SLH DSA changes in the next BC Java LTS release, because now that the algorithms are finally stabilized, we're actually going to introduce them into our stable Bouncy Castle release. We're also in discussions with our lab about, one of our labs, about adding the hardware support for some of the PQC stuff to the hardware-based API that we've got going through for certification for Intel. That's probably going to turn into an exercise of actually doing another certification on top of the existing one as it goes through, I suspect. It wouldn't surprise me, of course, that given the enthusiasm for getting post-quantum out there, that we'll wind up getting that one certified before we get the one that we've already submitted done. Really, for MLDSA, MLChem, and we would guess FNDSA as well, we're basically assuming that it's going to require some changes in the CPU architecture before it's really safe to try and certify those using a mixed hybrid mode of both JNI and native code. I will say that there's always a chance, though, that our work with the maths library might prove to be efficient enough and also simple enough that that might change. Because as I said, if you look at the figures for MLChem and consider the fact that people are going to be using this as a workhorse for protocols like TLS and that, obviously squeezing more speed out of it's going to be quite important. So this is where the Java LTS release will be available. And just to try not to preempt question time, but a question I've been asked a lot, in terms of regular Bouncy Castle, we're hoping to have the release out with the actual post-quantum algorithms proper in the next 4 weeks. So we're doing ACVP testing now. There's a number of public vectors we've got. John and the rest of the co at PQC Hackathon have made it possible for us to interoperate quite easily with public keys. There's still a few discussions about how private keys are meant to work in these algorithms, but at the moment we'll probably just run with what we've got, because we think what's probably going to happen is we'll wind up with a choice in the private key octet string that's used in PKCS8. The reason for that is that, yeah, some people have pointed out, for example, with dilithium, you can actually store private keys as a single seed and then just recompute it. And there's situations where that would be wonderful. Other people, though, have also pointed out that if you pre-compute a whole pile of stuff for dilithium and make the private key really, really a lot bigger, you can save an awful lot of memory from actually generating a signature, which is also, if you're in the right circumstances, quite useful. So I've got a feeling that what we're heading for is there'll be multiple encodings that people probably have to support. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions?
Hi, David. Yeah, it's John from Entrust. So I was just going to say thank you for doing this work. It's actually really important, because one thing that we've been kind of struggling with a bit or looking at is, so in our Java library as well, we're like, are we going to implement these new algorithms in native Java or just continue wrapping them? And it sounds like the answer that you're saying from this research you've done is wrapping them, at the moment at least, is going to give us the best performance.
Yeah, certainly in your case, I think. And certainly for MLChem, that's just a killer at the moment. I mean, the performance different. Actually, yeah. Let me just switch back to the slide.
David, we have only 4 minutes.
Oh, sorry?
You have 4 minutes.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Four.
Yeah, you can see there, though, the difference is enormous.
Yeah. So thank you for doing this work and helping us answer that question.
Although, yeah, we could always implement them better. So, watch this space. It'd be nice. Yep.
So you mentioned wanting to optimize the math for MLChem and CPU support.
Yeah.
I'm curious what that looks like beyond just small general purpose extensions to the vector arithmetic there. Because I mean, the operations you're doing in MLChem in particular, it's an NGT, and your reduction on small words, you have the primitives there. Are there particular ones that could be added?
Yeah, so really what I was talking about there was providing C native code which actually supported the basic fundamental operations that built the math in MLChem, and then calling that from Java instead. So, those operations were encapsulated in the native level. I mean, the key thing about that is because you're not dealing with lots of crazy pointer arithmetic and stuff, you can reliably make it safe. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So you've rightly been focusing on the sort of per message functions of these things. You haven't said anything about key generation, and if Sphinx is a bit of a headache, I'm very worried about how long the key generation of the Sphinx might take. Do you have any data on those?
We don't at the moment. I think Megan does because she basically benchmarked everything. But yeah, if you'd like to email me, I'm sure I can provide some.
Hi, thanks for the talk. For the ARM data, have you looked at, there's a academic project called Neon NTT that has like Neon native implementations of these things.
We haven't, and that was mainly for the reason that we just wanted a benchmark to start with, and LibOQS, as you can see, just wrapping that basically outperformed everything we were doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that would take it to another level, which would probably be a bit intimidating at this point in the project. But yeah, it's a good idea.
So one of the things you mentioned was that was probably causing performance degradation was the creation of short-lived buffers.
Yeah, definitely.
And
it was very strange behavior too, what we saw.
The NETI project, I think, has an implementation NetiBuff which uses like direct buffers which are pooled for like the networking stuff. And I was wondering, using something like that here would probably be better in the sense that normally when you are going from Java to the C layer, it's either you copy the data or you sort of use critical access, which prevents GC and all in the JVM.
Yeah.
And using direct buffers would probably be a better bet. And if they are pooled, even better because they are long-lived, then that would probably solve some problems.
I think that would definitely be worth trying. I mean, even doing things as simple as moving a memory allocation out of a loop into before the loop, and then making sure that that data was always overwritten. Because it's always the catch, if you're relying on it being zeroed out, then you can get yourself caught badly. Even doing simple things like that, those seem to improve performance. So I would suspect that if we did a lot more work in terms of like providing actual buffers that got used for the duration of the calculation, you'd probably see better performance as well, as you say. I think, yeah. We'll give it a go, see what it does.
Yeah, thanks.
One last question.
So you mentioned that you can generate the keys, but do you have a data to kind of show us the times that it takes to encrypt and decrypt data, and how big data? Like, let's say we use your algorithm and we want to encrypt like 1 GB or 2 GB. Just comparison, like how long it takes.
Okay, for that I'd probably recommend looking at my talk from last year. But again, yeah, if you'd like to email me. For bulk encryption, obviously using AES. So really what we're talking about with the chems is, the best you can do is generate an AES key, or at least a secret to use to generate an AES key. But we were actually, using the JNI layer, we actually got better performance than you would get from Oracle Growl. And that was largely thanks to the fact that we were able to work with someone from Intel that really understood how the microarchitecture worked. So they were able to tell us exactly what to do to get the thing pipelining as effectively as possible. And those numbers were very intimidating. They were very nice. which is why we embarked on this hopeful project. But as it turned out, we might have just been a bit early.
So,
Sorry, I have to stop. I'm sorry. If you'd like to talk to me afterwards,
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. You can continue getting. Thank you for that interesting talk. And we have our final session for this morning is from Nina Bindel, and she's a staff researcher at SandboxAQ Germany, and she came from Germany, another out of country person. And her topic is all the things PQ, end-to-end PQ's secure FIDO2 protocol. Welcome, Nina.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Nina, and I know we have heard a lot about post-quantum already in this session, so thankfully I don't have to explain all the algorithms. That's very nice. But also in the past 2 days, we have heard a lot about post-quantum. So this project here, or this talk, is actually about a few projects that we had in the last 2 to 3 years, and we were looking at the FIDO2 protocol for passwordless authentication. And so in this project, we had 2 academic collaborations, also an open source project that I will explain here, and the work is based on a numerous collaborators that I'm really thankful for. All right. So as I said, I will skip the post-quantum part. So to say the post-quantum explanation, I will dive right into the FIDO2 protocol, explaining a little bit what it is. It is also known as passkeys, a word that has been more popular in the recent years. And I will also go into the cryptographic protocol that is underlying FIDO2. Then I explain our open source implementation, also show some benchmarks, and then I finish with challenges and future work. All right. So what is the motivation for the FIDO2 protocol? The motivation is that nearly every digital service, from email to banking, requires a password for access, but often, unfortunately, they are the first and also only defense. And I'm sure you have seen these numbers, but I still find them impressive, that, for example, the password 123456 is still one of the most used passwords that you can see. What is also known is that nearly 2/3 of the internet users keep track of their passwords by memory or in handwritten notes. The other, so to say, one quarter of people rely on a document on their computer to manage all their passwords. Right? And this leads, of course, to weak passwords, or most of the cases to weak passwords that are easy to memorize or to write down. In this picture, I would like to point you to the 3-digit PIN that is used to secure the book. So I find that particularly quirky. Anyway, so the problem statement is clearly classical authentication solutions are not working for the web. Passwords are hard to remember, or they are weak. They are vulnerable to phishing attacks. And but there are solutions like also password managers that do at least usually increase the strength of the passwords. They are really hard to sync across different devices. Now, of course, we also have multi-factor authentication. Their usability is still a little bit low. So the majority is still using just passwords. They still rely on passwords, partially, and they're still vulnerable to phishing attacks, albeit the phishing attacks are more targeted, of course. All right, here comes FIDO2. So the FIDO2 authentication is an alternative. You don't need to remember passwords. It relies on public secret key credentials, so it relies on public key cryptography. It is rather easy to use. It is resistant to phishing attacks, so this is the FIDO Alliance big selling point here. It undergoes constant improvement, so it's a very active standard. It's an open standard, and it's also widely adopted. So it's supported by all the major browsers and platforms, and there's also a wide range of industry partners that do offer FIDO2 authentication, or also are member of the FIDO2 Alliance. And since this year, we're very proud that Sandbox is also part of the FIDO Alliance. That means we are working with them also in the working groups. And now I'm standing here talking about post-quantum, so we are helping to contribute to the evolvement of the specs regarding post-quantum. So FIDO came out in 2014. It started as a second factor authentication. Then in 2019, like the foundation of FIDO2 protocol was built. It consists of two sub-protocols, the CTAP, that is maintained by the FIDO Alliance, and WebAuthn, which is maintained by the W3C. And the new idea here is that security tokens, hardware tokens, generate credentials, which can then be registered at web services and used to authenticate. Now in 2022, passkeys was invented, and this is also the term you find more and more. So passkeys is essentially the FIDO2 protocol. It's still the same cryptographic core protocol underlying, but now you can sync your credentials or via different devices, trusting third parties. And very recently, the FIDO Alliance published a white paper addressing the FIDO Alliance's technologies in the post-quantum world. And while this paper was not very technical, it acknowledged the quantum threat, and it essentially gave two tasks. One is to find out what are the suitable algorithms, and the other one to find ways to provide a smooth transition from the classical tokens, so to say, to quantum secure tokens. All right, so far so good. This is the setup. So let's see how the cryptographic protocol is. The FIDO2 protocol is essentially a challenge response protocol consisting of these two sub-protocols that I mentioned. So WebAuthn is essentially the protocol between, or the API, I should say, the API between the web application, the web server, and the client, the web browser. However, it also defines a token model that defines how the token and the web browser communicate, and then CTAP is an instantiation of this token model. And so CTAP is the protocol that defines the operation and the communication of the token and between token and web browser, and it also ensures that only authenticated clients can actually access this token. And I already mentioned it's a challenge response protocol, so the server starts with a randomly chosen message and sends this together with some info. The web browser essentially just forwards it to the token, which does then do a handshake and symmetric encryption, communicating between the web browser and the token and asking the user for a user gesture. And so this user gesture, depending on what the server wants, could be entering a PIN, could be biometric data, or it could be also just pressing a button. And so once the user gesture is provided, the token then generates this public secret key credentials, also called the assertion keys. Optionally, there can also be an attestation statement generated. And so there are different attestation types, and I won't go into detail here, just so you have an idea what's going on. So the most common and default attestation type is none. So usually no attestation is provided, nothing is done here. Then another one is self-attestation. In self-attestation, the just generated assertion keys, so the just generated signing keys, are used to sign an attestation statement. So cryptographically, this doesn't add much, right? Then we have the the next one is basic attestation or batch attestation, and it's interesting. So in this, a batch of at least 100,000 tokens share the same attestation certificate that, for example, certifies they are from the same security level, or they are done by Ubico or by some other manufacturer, right? And they share the same attestation key. And then we have a more advanced one. It's a privacy or anonymity TCA, where it's kind of an online, or it can be implemented as an online attestation certification. But again, there you also need trust of a third party. And so in another paper, we kind of analyzed the privacy and security of these, and this is kind of a rough visualization. So privacy in FIDO2 means that the different web services where the same hardware token is registered cannot be linked, even if they collaborate, right? And so in this sense, we have here different different trade-offs between security and privacy. In this paper, we are only concerned, or like in this presentation, we are only concerned with the attestation types none itself, as an example. Going back to the protocol, we generated the keys. Now, of course, we send the public key and potentially also the attestation signature, some more info. This is verified, and then the public key is stored. Now, authentication is a very similar flow, just that, of course, we don't create these keys, but we generate now the assertion signature. And if the signature is valid and the web server can verify them, the user is logged in. Now, as explained also by Lily, and I'm sure you also know this, the quantum threat is mostly against the asymmetric cryptography, right? Of course, also with symmetric cryptography, here and there we want to increase key sizes, output length, and so on and so forth. But so also here, these are the primitives we need to look at if we mostly look at when we want to make it post-quantum secure. That means in CTAP, we need to look at the handshake, and in WebAuthn, we need to look at the signature schemes. And this is also something that our theoretical analysis, how we concluded that in WebAuthn and CTAP, both of them are, so to say, quantum ready. And this is something that we could prove also with a security reduction. So if you instantiate the signature with a post-quantum signature, and if you instantiate the Diffie-Hellman-based handshake in the CTAP with a post-quantum KEM, then it is actually quantum ready, and we can prove this. All right, so the instantiation, of course, you use the post-quantum KEM, you use the post-quantum signature, you increase your hash output length. And interestingly is also that WebAuthn and CTAP already offer different kinds of algorithms, right? So for example, WebAuthn, you can use ECDSA or RSA, and also CTAP has 2 different Diffie-Hellman-based instantiations. And so for post-quantum, we can piggyback on this kind of negotiation algorithm. And the negotiation is kind of similar to TLS in the sense that the server sends an ordered list of accepted algorithms, and then the token chooses the first one in this ordered list that it supports and chooses this as to generate the credential keys. And in this sense, we can also ensure backwards compatibility with legacy systems, which is always important when hardware is involved. And also we can the server can also say, okay, we support hybrid, for example. That was also a topic that came up, and things like that, right? This is under the control of the server. All right, so far so good. So what did we actually do with the post-quantum? For now, we did use Dilithium and Kyber in WebAuthn and CTAP. We are not using hybrid modes at the moment. There are other works that mostly focus on the token side of things that do use hybrid algorithms for the signature. We are not doing that right now, but we are planning to do so as well. Then something that is different from other works in this space is that we are really trying to do this end-to-end registration authentication flow. So really we provided implementation, or the goal of this project was to provide all 3 parties, the server side, the client, and the token with post-quantum, so you can have the entire registration authentication flow post-quantum secure, and you can find this as an open source, so you can download it on the Git account. All right, since we wanted to have this end-to-end implementation, it was a pretty big project, so we did not start from scratch, but we started from other open source libraries. Most importantly here, for the token side, we are using the Trust framework. So Trust is, at the core, it is the FIDO2 protocol. By now, it also does many more things, and it came out of a collaboration of SoloKey and NitroKey, 2 open source providers for the FIDO2 protocol. On the client side, we are using Mozilla Firefox, and on the server side, we are using Yubico's kind of Play or Toy server, which is based on Java. On the cryptographic layer, on the token side, again, we are using algorithms that are based on PQ-Clean, using Rust wrappers, as Trust is written in Rust. On Firefox, if you remember the protocol, in the WebAuthn part, so when signatures is used, the client essentially just forwards the messages, right? So in the WebAuthn, the client doesn't really do cryptographic operations, but in CTAP. So in CTAP, if you do the handshake, of course the client does use cryptographic operations, but we only use Kyber here. And so this is the Kyber variant that we are using right now. And on the server side, we are using liboqs, also wrapped, but work in progress is to switch to Java implementations, actually. All right, and in a collaboration of many people here who helped me get this to work, I can show you a little video, a little demo of the toy server. So here you see my colleague typing in the username and so on, and to then create the credential. You can see the prompt that she's asked to touch the security token, which you also see, which she does. And then registration is started. I think it's a little bit small for you to see. So what she's saying there is, yes, registration is started. And the algorithm that is used is actually Delphium. And in the end, also, it takes some time. It needs some bytes. And in the end, registration is successful. This is the public key displayed there. And then if we authenticate here again, a prompt shows up. Again, she provides the user gesture, and then we authenticate using Delphium. And this is also what she shows here. Authentication is started. Delphium is used. This is the public key that is used. And there was a successful authentication. So we have talked a little bit about key sizes before on this conference also, right? Also in the panel earlier in the previous session, we talked a lot about sizes. What you see here in this table are the object sizes of the post-quantum web authentication. Do I have a laser pointer? Yeah, there you go. Right. So, and what you can see, so in the objects, of course, from the server to the client, nothing changes, right? Or like, that's not true. Actually, something changes because the list of supported algorithm gets longer, right? But that's not so important. So essentially, nothing changes here. And you can see we have observed the ECD's A sizes and the Delphium sizes, and Falcon, we have not observed the sizes, but I just want to include it here already as it's planned work, and and it's a nice comparison. What can you see here? I displayed the public key and the signature key sizes in raw bytes. So this will be important later. So these are the raw, the size of the raw bytes of the public key and signature. Then we have the attestation object and then the credential object in different colors. So why do I emphasize this with the raw bytes? Because you can see here in ECD's A, we have very small keys, we know that. In post-quantum, we have large keys, large signatures, we know that, right? But now you can see that the entire credential object is very, very large. And where does this come from? And it is that the entire object is encoded as a base 64, but then the raw data, of course, is in a different encoding. And so switching from the raw data to base 64, it's about 30%, a little bit more, it's about 30%. And so you can see that relatively, the increase, of course, is the same, but then concretely, absolutely, it leads to even bigger object sizes here. And so indeed, maybe one way could be that the public key is stored in raw bytes, but then, of course, it's a little bit weird, right, if we would include that or if we would propose that in the specs, because then the cryptographic algorithm doesn't only define the type of the credential key, but it actually also defines how it is communicated. It defines the encoding. So I can absolutely see that people in the FIDO Alliance do not like that. But we have to see how far we get with these sizes. All right. And what I also show here is that, of course, if you actually use attestation, self-attestation, then you include the signature. And if you use no attestation, then you include only the public key. If you go to Falcon, then it looks better, as Falcon has smaller sizes. We know that. In particular, the public key and signature key are just a little bit larger than the dilithium public key itself. So now the question is Falcon a good alternative, right? And for that, I would like to show you some benchmarks. So our benchmarks are either taken on the developer board or also on the Nitro hacker key. That's the key you saw actually in the video and my colleague touched. Both of them use the M33 or very similar variant. And so these are the benchmarks comparing ECDSA and dilithium. Let me explain a little bit the different points in time we measure here. So the first one, which is not as important, is when the user clicks register a new credential or register with passkeys or authenticate with passkeys, right? So this is this point here and this point here. And then the second one is when the prompt is shown. Well, actually, that's not true. The second point in time is when the user presses the key. Because, of course, it takes me quite a while until I find my Nitro key to put in. So we took that time out of the equation here. And then the second measuring point is when the client receives the success message, right? And so here we have no attestation. So this is just key generation, what's happening here. And then for the second one, what you can see in this part here is then the signature generation and the signature verification. And here it is also where dilithium is just slower than ECDSA, right? I'm a little bit careful. I'm also not showing exactly the numbers, and this is because this is preliminary data. We have not optimized it for the, not further optimized it for the M33, so to say, right? So definitely also if you implement this in hardware, you can optimize this much, much more. It's just a preliminary work. Thank you. Then the question is, what about Falcon, right? So here you see results from a different work from a colleague of mine, James Ho and Bas Westerbaan, and they looked at the M7. Now the Nitro key and the board that we are using is the M33, right? So I'm aware that this is not comparable, but still it gives an intuition. And the intuition is that here we have dilithium 3 signing and verify, and we see that on the M7 with their optimization, Falcon is actually faster. Both operations is actually faster, which is what matters for our end-to-end benchmarks. But you can see Falcon also appears here, right? And the point is why Falcon is very fast and it also has smaller keys, it needs floating point operations. And so if you have them, indeed Falcon is fast. However, the M33 does not have floating point, does not support floating point operations, and then we do end up here larger than dilithium. And that's kind of the trade-off that work in progress we want to look at. How bad is it? Can we optimize it further? Because the problem here is that users get fussy if they have to wait too long, right? And it's not only the user experience that's getting bad. If users unplug the key, they press buttons, many things happen in this protocol or can happen in this protocol. It is also an entryway to different attacks. So this is why we need to stay under a certain threshold. All right, this brings me to the last part of the talk, the challenges in future work. So we are right here in this corner right now, where we are testing preliminary work, efficiency of the post-quantum algorithm, what are sizes, how slow is it actually, and when we are discussing, do we need to change hardware to offer the right user experience, or can we work with the current hardware? Of course, if we change hardware, we also need to recertificate the hardware tokens. I mean, we anyway also have to do that if we change the hardware implementation, of course. We have to distribute the new hardware. And there we are really here, something that was also mentioned this morning in the panel. We are, with authentication and signatures, we are really in the supply channel problem, right, and the scalability. So it is not enough just to switch out the signature, but usually there is like a rat tail of things that we have to do. One of them is distribution of new hardware, also updating the CAs, like the authorities that provide the attestation certificates, the browsers, the web applications, right? All of them. It's always a question who moves first. And then, of course, we also need to update the FIDO specs, where, again, the choice of algorithm is important, the smooth transition, backwards compatibility. Do we wait for the new batch of NIST signature algorithms, where there might be smaller signatures there? Do we work with the lithium on Falcon right now? Right, so there are a few interesting questions that I think interesting decisions to take. So yeah, this serves as a first step. This is how I view it. Work in progress or future work is adding these different algorithms, as I mentioned, but there are also other modes in FIDO and in WebAuthn. And so, for example, yeah, the attestation modes, of course, I mentioned to you already, but there's also the question, how do you store your secret key? Do you store it as a seed or as a complete secret key? Do you store it at the key? Do you encrypt it and send it to the client? So WebAuthn actually offers a range of different variants, and maybe there are trade-offs also depending on the post-quantum algorithm you use. This is also something we would like to find out. With that, I would like to, this is just a summary of the resources and the blog posts and things to have it together on the page. With that, I'm thanking you for your attention. Happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you. Nina, thank you very much. Let me ask, are there any questions for Nina? All right, there they are.
I would like to ask about the formal works about the changing the specs of FIDO 2, because I see that you made some work, and how does it, how it's represented in the changes in the official documentations. Is it happening? Is there any working group, or it's the task for a future and now you're making just engineering work?
Yes.
Because I see also there's an e-print paper about FIDO 2, and is it also some kind of approach to attempt to make any standardization, or how does it look like from the formal perspective?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, you're asking about what is the standardization process, how it does go in. So the papers that you see here, these are academic papers. So they are not directly going into the FIDO Alliance, but we do hope that they are a discussion point. So the FIDO Alliance is starting their discussion more concretely about post-quantum, how to add that. And as we are part of this, we hope that we can also influence there, based on also this provable secure work that we are doing. But I can't say any timelines. It's just to be defined, actually.
Okay, so far there's no any working group on this. It's for a future task.
There's no working group.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for sharing this. You showed us that you are able to create the public key and all those things. Do you have, are you working, or can you encrypt and decrypt, and can you show us like you're able to decrypt, encrypt like bigger files or something like that? Do you have like an end-to-end flow all the way to key generation, encrypt, decrypt, and all that?
You mean a more fine-grained benchmarking?
Right.
No, we are also working on that. It's not as easy because you have different, from a benchmarking perspective, it's interesting because you have different platforms, right? You have the signing operation on the server, you have the client when it receives, and you have also the crypto operations on the token. And so they don't share the same clock, right? So it's not as simple to provide these granular benchmarking, but we are hardly working on it.
but you can just take like a hello world kind of a plain text and encrypt and decrypt using that public key, right?
But, I mean, you can encrypt plain text. That's not what FIDO wants, though, right? So FIDO wants to sign things, and in order to do that, it does run the CTAP for the key, for the communication of the web browser. But you are not using the key otherwise.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I mean, you showed us the public key, but what about the decryption key and all that? Like, I mean, in the CERT, you will be sharing the public key, right?
Yeah.
But the decryption key is shared at the connection, right? When you
that's true. Yeah, right. Sure. So right. So right. That's true. That's true. I haven't shared but they are just Kyber keys, essentially. But yeah, I have not showed the data that's communicated between CTAP and the client. No, I don't have this observed data available right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
So we'll take that, if you have one more question, we'll take that as the last question. Or if it's going to be long, then we can take it offline.
Hi, so you've gone with dilithium 3 and comparing that to 256-bit ECDSA. Dilithium 2 is the one that's sort of aiming for that sort of security level. Is dilithium 3 just a sort of conservative choice, or is it's not written in stone?
Right. Good question. So I can see where your question is coming from. I do see dilithium 3 as the one that realistically is the smallest parameter that's used, and so this was the decision that we took. Yeah, good question.
So with that, I want to thank Nina again for a very interesting presentation. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you.
Hang on a second. Huh?
Sure.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, testing. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So, because of sake of the time, we would like to start today's session. So, our first speaker is Jim Goodman from Crypto 4A Technologies from Canada, and he's going to give a talk about NIST, NCCOE, PQC migration, HSM interoperability testing. So, please join me. Welcome Jim to his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reza. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so actually I work for Crypto 4A, but today I'm kind of putting on my public service hat. I'm going to talk about some stuff we did at the NCCOE. If you are not familiar with the NCCOE, you're in luck, because we're going to explain to you what it is to start the talk off. We're going to give you a little bit of flavor in terms of what it works on. And then we're going to explain to you how we did basically a bunch of HSM interoperability testing as part of that initiative, and I'll present some of the results here and give you guys a feel for it. So, starting things off, let's talk about the NCCOE. So what is it? It's the NIST. Well, it's a NIST organization. Basically, it's the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. It lives within NIST. It is a group, and basically their intent there is they bring together private industry, such as ourselves. They bring government agencies, such as the NSA and NIST and the likes, and as well as academia is welcome as well. And the intent here is just to look at cybersecurity issues and come up with tools and techniques and publish documents to help people do things like protect their data, their people, and their assets, essentially. Now, within the NCCOE, there's a number of different initiatives, and the one we were involved with is called the PQC Initiative, and basically it's, the PQC Transition Initiative, and basically, as you might guess from the name, we're focused on looking at the problem of transitioning from classical to PQC, and looking at the various kind of pitfalls along the way, and looking at how we can provide methodologies, reports, experiences. There's an entire lab set up so we can actually bring gear in and play with things. And it's basically just looking at all the different kind of issues that are going to pop up when you try to do the transition into PQC. Something I'll mention as well, this is an initiative that really only kicked off in 2022, so it's actually pretty young, if you want to call it that. And a really nice thing about being part of this initiative is everything gets documented and gets released into the public domain. And in this case, it's all released as part of Special Pub 1800-38. And there's 3 documents released under that at the moment. One is for the overall project, that's 38A. One is for, we'll talk about this, but a discovery workstream, that's 38B. And then the one that we're interested in terms of interop and performance is published under 38C. So if you have any questions, those documents actually give you really nice kind of overviews and summaries of everything I'm going to talk about here, essentially. Now, on top of that, I will also give you a link to the NCCOE PQC migration page, because one of the things I'd like to do too is draw awareness to the NCCOE PQC migration, because we think it's a fantastic effort as a private company participating. So we'd like to encourage others who might be in the audience to come join the party and be part of this as well. In terms of what is the NCCOE, and I apologize for the size, you probably can't read most of that, but basically it's a wide swath of companies. And we've got people like Cisco, we've got ourselves as HSM providers, we've got agencies like the NSA. We're all together. I took this picture last week, so there's about 40 companies at the moment, always growing. Marusha and Bill are always looking for new people to join. But one thing that you'll notice is if we go through it, and I've highlighted them in red, is in this group of 40 companies, 6 of them were HSM providers. And in fact, you could argue it's probably a critical mass of HSM providers. There's a few who aren't in this list, and that's fine. We'd love to have them join. But it did give us the idea that when we were talking about what could we do as part of the PQC initiative, was to kind of say, well, we have a ton of PQC people here. We have a ton of HSM providers here. How about we do some interoperability testing? Because at the time, this was done back in 2023, most of this work, there was no CAVP testing. There was no interop testing whatsoever for PQC for the most part, beyond people publishing some algorithms. So we decided to take the initiative to try and create something where we could actually do interop testing within kind of a formal structure and do it with all the other HSM vendors as well. Because we all know that that's a really important thing. If we're going to make this transition, we need to make sure that the gear we're going to bring in to do it works amongst itself. Okay. Now, how the NCC PQC initiative is actually structured, what we've done is we take the group of companies and we split them up into what we call them work streams. And they're basically focus areas to work. So initially, the 2 work streams that we came up with, one was discovery. And discovery is basically the notion that you want to do inventory and survey of devices and networks and things, and coming up with tools and techniques and procedures and policies for how to accomplish that goal. Because one of the first things you have to do is understand what is at risk. Discovery was designed to basically look at what is at risk and come up with procedures to identify that. And that was originally led actually by Dave McGrew from Cisco, but now Evgeny Jervis from SafeLogic has taken over. And it's actually that work stream's actually, they kind of delivered on the discovery component. And what they're doing now is they've actually kind of said, okay, well, now that we have all these assets and we know what's there, now we have to come up with techniques because there's so much stuff. How do we assign risk levels to all those things? And then how do we actually prioritize and come up with techniques for actually attacking it and mitigating those problems? So they've kind of, that work stream's actually evolved into the next generation thing, which is kind of cool. Now the other primary work stream, the one that obviously I'm most interested in, is interop and performance. And this work stream was entirely focused on, okay, what is the effect of going to PQC? Like, what happens to these protocols? What happens to these algorithms? How do we get different components to work together? Do they work together? Do we have any evidence that like OpenSSH and this proprietary SSH client are going to work? That whole work stream was targeted for looking at those kinds of things and trying to do some investigations and experimentations, and again, setting things up in a lab and actually starting to beat up on things and see what would happen. And then on top of all this, another really kind of cool aspect of the NCCOE is we're always evolving. So we've kind of delivered on the first 2, the discovery and the interop and performance. So we are, in our current meetings, looking at, well, what comes next, right? So if you were to come join the NCCOE, we'd be very interested in understanding what you thought was a priority from the PQC transition perspective and how we could structure new kind of investigations and work streams to try and deliver on those issues and concerns that you may have. And then obviously, another thing that's happening within the NCCOE PQC initiative, and it's happening all over the place, it's not just us, but, and I just wanted to draw attention, is that Lily Chen from NIST is currently looking at crypto agility, and she's trying to write a white paper to provide structure to it, define the language, define the concepts, talk about the things we need to worry about, and that's actually, she's working closely with a lot of the people from the NCCOE to deliver on that. So, like I said, I'm most interested in interop and performance. What exactly does that mean? Basically what we do, as I said, we look at performance interoperability issues related to PQC transitions. And within that, in terms of the activities we've done so far, we looked at a ton of protocols to see what are the effects of putting PQC, and as well as making sure that various clients from within those protocols work together. And in terms of the ones we actually delivered on, QUIC, SSH, TLS, VPNs, we looked at, I say X509, but it's really certificates in general. And I'll give a shout out to John Gray on that one, because he's done a lot of work as well to help with that. And then, of course, HSM interoperability, which is what obviously I'm most interested in. And as I said before, all the results of all these investigations with a lot of detailed graphs and performance metrics and numbers and stuff can all be found in that SB 1800-38C document. And there's a link to it there, or you get the slides, you can just click through onto it. Okay? And I've also provided the list of the primes in the various areas, so if you have questions about what was done, don't be afraid. Feel free to reach out to these people and ask them questions. They'd be happy to hear. And one thing actually, I don't know if I showed it, I probably showed it in the previous slide, I'll throw a shout out to Christian Paquin from Microsoft. He actually led our group, and he did a fantastic job in that as well. So, HSM interop. Remember, this was done back in 2023. We did not have any final standards, we did not have any IPDs. We just had a dream, and we had a bunch of HSM providers. So, first step was we had to agree on what it was we were going to try and interop test with. So basically, as a group, and this still amazes me that 6 HSM vendors got into a room and managed to agree on something, we came up with a list of algorithms we wanted to test and what specific variants of them we wanted to test with. And that's just designated here. We can see for Kyber and Dilithium and Falcon, we basically chose, at the time, the most recent versions of the standards. They're all some variant of round 3, essentially. And then for LMS and XMSS, the good thing there is we had the RFCs. I could have also put down SP 800-28, but it just refers back to these, so why bother? But the point is everybody was designing to the same thing, right? Because if we hadn't, interoperability would have been a nightmare. But because we had these specific instances, we had references that we could design to. Now another aside, and again, if you're not too familiar with stateful hash-based signatures, one of the things you have to know is that with Dilithium and Kyber and Sphinx Plus, it's kind of decided what specifically the parameter sets are. It's not so much with HSS LMS and XMSS and XMSMT. There's a ton of different things you can do. There's tons of different configurations. So what we had to do to keep the scale and the scope limited was we had to make some judicious choices as to what variants we're going to test. And those are just tabulated here. So we try to keep things simple, right? This is basically best effort for people doing this on top of their day jobs. We chose to use the SHA-2 variants, so everything's SHA-256, essentially. And then we chose single and dual tree heights for the HSS components. We chose heights anywhere from 5 to 40 on the total tree height. And then we always chose the same winterness parameter of 8. And then when we slide over to the XMSS and the XMSMT, we basically chose 3 of each configurations. And these, to their credit, are probably the most common configurations people are using. But again, it's just kind of keep it simple, right? It's all SHA-256, winterness parameter of 4 in this case. And then we either have just single tree or we have the dual or triple layer tree depending on XMSMT configuration. But again, the important thing here is we knew ahead of time exactly what we were designing to for interoperability. And then the elephant in the room, as always, is OIDs. We have to identify algorithms that were used. Again, 2023, don't really have OIDs. So what was decided was basically we would look to the IETF hackathon effort, which I provide a link to in the slides, and which I will throw props to. It is a fantastic initiative, and I believe John Gray is going to give a talk on what they've been doing there. But basically, they had already done the work to come up with a set of OIDs for the various algorithms and parameter sets. We just blatantly stole them for the most part. The one thing I will mention is that this was done in 2023. Obviously, since the release of the IPD and the FIPS, all of these OIDs are deprecated. They're all old, right? So now we have official OIDs, or we have progressed OIDs like to the IPD variants and stuff. That is, with the exception of the stateful hash-based signature ones, those OIDs are still quote-unquote official, and people are using them essentially, okay? All right, so now that we know what we're going to be testing, the question really came down to, well, how are we going to go about testing? That was the next big argument we would have. It wasn't really an argument, to be honest. We got together as a group, and we decided on how we do things. Step 1, keep it as simple as possible, right? We're all engineers. We like to keep things simple. The intent there was, wherever possible, try to use binary formats, try to stay away from encodings to avoid testing to decoding and decoding, but basically try to look at the actual math. Not always possible, obviously, in terms of keys and stuff. You have to use things like PEM encoding. It's pretty common for objects. So the 3 kind of things we wanted to test were in terms of key generation and import. So we wanted to be able to generate key pairs, export the public keys, and import them into a destination HSM. And that's essentially what the test did. We also want to do digital signatures. So there, generate a key pair, export its public key, use that basically to generate a signature, preferably in a binary format, perhaps in PEM, give that to a destination HSM, have it import the public key, and try to verify the signature. Super simple. And then with chems, it gets a little more complicated because it's kind of this back and forth process. Generate the key pair, export the public key, import it, generate an encapsulation, give back the ciphertext, give them a record of what was encapsulated, and then have them do a decapsulation and then verify that they could in fact generate the same shared secret. But very simple kind of testing and the likes, okay? Last little kind of details, again, trying to follow the IETF hackathon approach. We use GitHub for the exchange of artifacts amongst companies. Initially, we're just using email. It gets pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. NIST was nice enough to set up a GitHub repo for us. Unfortunately, being NIST in that, there were rules regarding publication of information, so it's actually a private GitHub repo. So unless you come join the NCCOE, unfortunately, you won't have access to it at this point, as far as I know. If I'm mistaken, I'm sure Maruja will get up and correct me, but we had a private GitHub repo, and within that, we basically just created a directory structure that kind of suited what the problem was we were trying to test. So for the case of digital signatures, basically we'd have a directory structure where we would have artifacts, name of the company that's being tested. Within it, we would have the OID of whatever signature algorithm we're doing, and then within that, we'd provide things like the message we signed, we'd provide the public key that should validate, and we'd provide the actual signatures themselves. And then we just publish that, and then basically another company could come along, download those artifacts, verify, and then basically let us know whether or not they were successful or not, okay? Chem gets a little more complicated, like I said. Here, basically, you would have a directory for Crypto4A, the OID of the chem, and then we would just publish the public key. And then what would happen is companies would come, they'd take the public key, they'd use it for encapsulation, and they'd create a subdirectory with their name, and they'd put the ciphertext and shared secret into that, and then we would come back and pull the information out of that and do a decapsulation and verify that we match, essentially. So it's a little more complicated directory structure, but for the most part, it's nice, it's on GitHub, it's easy, do it at your own leisure, it's asynchronous, life is pretty good. All right, test results. So given we defined the methodology, given we defined what we wanted to test, in terms of we look at the results of what was tested, again, we'll throw back to SP 1800-38C. all these results are in much more detail there. I've tried to summarize things. I've tried to simplify pictures, but all the gory details are in that document. And if you're, got to go, one thing I would summarize is that everything worked really surprisingly well. In fact, it wasn't perfect. We did have, I believe, one interoperability issue, but that was it. Out of the hundreds of tests we ran, we had one issue, and that was pretty impressive, I thought, especially given the nature of the testing. So in terms of the algorithms, not everybody supported every variant and every algorithm type. One thing I will say, though, is that for any given algorithm, we had multiple HSM vendors providing references, so we were able to sufficiently do interop testing on every single possible combination, which was really kind of cool. This tabulates that and summarizes everything in terms of the HSM vendors and what they supported. Obviously, a green check means it's fully supported. A red X means it wasn't supported at the time. And of course, this might all have changed since. So, take it with, it is a moment in time in 2023, essentially. And then some of them, people had support, that's the blue check marks, but there was some constriction on it. So for example, with Kyber and dilithium, IBM didn't support the lowest security levels, for example. So the blue represents incomplete support, we'll call it, okay? But like I said, everything was tested, which is great, but no one company had everything. Okay. In terms of the results, again, I'd look at the document. What you want to see here, though, is if you look at the tabulation on the bottom, every configuration that was supposedly there and that we actually got around to testing and realized that we couldn't test every algorithm because it's best effort. So if Crypto4A didn't have time to run a test, I can't force Crypto4A to do a test. Although I guess I could force Crypto4A given it's me. But other people you can't. But everything worked for Kyber, the lithium key export import. In terms of Falcon, again, same thing, just less implementations of it. In terms of the stateful hash-based signature, again, everything worked. But again, less support for it for the most part. Give people a chance to take a picture. Okay. In terms of signing and verifying, again, by far the most common algorithm was dilithium. No surprise there. Everything that was tested worked, essentially, which is another thing. For Falcon, a lot less, just less popular at the time. But again, everything tested worked. Okay. And then for Sphinx, similarly, but now you notice this is the one place where we had an interoperability issue. It might have since been fixed, but at the time, Entrust artifacts, we were not able to verify them from Crypto4A or from Talus perspective. And similarly, they couldn't verify our artifacts, but Talus and Crypto4A were able to test each other. So I suspect there might have just been an issue in the Entrust implementation. And again, could be totally fixed by now. I expect it is. But that was the one place where we didn't have interoperability in the entire initiative. And for the stateful hash-based signatures, again, less of it, but everything that was tested worked. Yep. All right. HSS, same thing. Everything that was tested worked. And then in terms of key encapsulation and decapsulation, much like dilithium, everything tested worked, and most people supported most versions of that. In terms of future work, obviously, we want to extend the interoperability testing. So if you are an HSM vendor and you want to do some testing, feel free to reach out to me, or you could reach out to Maruja or Bill, who work within the NCCOE PQC initiative. Come join the team. Or if you just want to do some testing, contact me and we can actually set that up outside the NCCOE thing. Happy to do that as well. We obviously want to do FIPS standards testing as well, interoperability testing, and that is both just the generic internal, but that can be tested with CAVP, as well as we want to do pure and pre-hash signing variants. We want to couple into the IETF hackathon effort a little better. And then lastly, we want to do application level testing. So take a TLS application that talks to another one that back ends into one of our HSMs to make sure that flow works. And there's all sorts of ways to do those combinations. Yeah, and this just summarizes. I was most impressed by the openness and willingness of the various companies to work together. I thought we accomplished some great results. We had to do both defining the scope, writing the documents, performing the test, capturing the data. So I thought it worked really well, and I think it's a perfect example of the notion of a rising tide raises all boats, because I think this was a success. And that's it. And I look forward to, obviously moving on to the next phase of this opportunity. And that's it. I don't know if people have questions. Go ahead, Rosa.
Great job. We have a few minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the great talk, Valerie Fennick with the PK611 Technical Committee. Yep. I just wanted to say, just have a quick question on this. As you're evolving, as the standards are evolving, how quickly can most HSM vendors apply the new standards to their own software and also the hardware that you're adding in?
Hardware's going to be harder, obviously. Depending on, like, if they're relying on hardware acceleration, they have to wait till the accelerators exist. From a firmware perspective, they'll have to come up with an upgrade. Currently, we are ready to go in terms of doing standards-based testing. We're waiting for others to be ready to go for that. But I think people are pushing hard to do it, which is kind of cool, right? But the nice thing is that because we're not, because we can do this person-to-person kind of thing, we don't have to wait for the CAV-P servers to come up and running, which I do appreciate the fact NIST got CAV-P internal testing up so quickly. That was phenomenal. But we still got to do pre-hash and pure now, right? And that doesn't exist. This is a perfect opportunity to get out in front of that and test as soon as we have it, right? So we don't have to wait, which is kind of cool, right? Yeah. Next question.
Hi there. You didn't touch on anything with performance. Was that considered, or how did that look?
No, that's a fantastic question. We were just doing HSM interoperability. Performance is a little trickier to do because we weren't doing batch testing and stuff like that. There was performance testing done at the protocol level, like the SSH and the TLS. That has performance metrics. And if you go to SB 1800-38C, you will see all that data. This test was not concerning that. It was just, does it work? That's really what we're looking for. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. We're good?
Any other questions? So let's thank the speaker again.